Wow, thank you for coming. It's great to be here with you. You know, you can call a meeting, you never know if anybody's going to come. This is wonderful. And the energy's great. All right, so first of all, then I'm going to give you a little information that you might have picked up with these earlier events. Dan Sheehan and I are going to facilitate this meeting today. We won't always be the people up here talking. It's not about us. This is about coming together to do something in a coalition, in a community effort for our community, our county, and our future children and grandchildren. Danny and I are from the Romero Institute, which is a nonprofit law and policy center here in Santa Cruz. But we're the former directors of the Christic Institute, which was very active here in Santa Cruz in the 80s and early 90s. When we had 1,000 action teams all over the country. And our history, I'll let him, of course, talk about his history, which is very long and complicated and amazing. What I would say about mine is that I have a history of working originally in the National Organization for Women. I worked in community access television productions here in Santa Cruz in the early 70s, which was really the precedent that led to the big center downtown, because we were doing news 3 nights a week. And I also worked in the labor movement for now as a national labor coordinator for them. And then in that position became the director of the Karen Silkwood Fund and the Karen Silkwood Project, which is nuclear. And when we won that, what eventually became a trial, that was first a congressional investigation and hearings, when we won that, it stopped them from ordering or building any new plants for 30 years. And after that, we founded Christic, and all the 30 people or so that were working on Silkwood got together and said, okay, we're going to form a nonprofit and continue working on cases and investigations and public education programs and organizing programs that will expose very serious injustice and illegalities by corporate and government officials, and will also work on policy solutions and structural solutions to these problems. So it's real change and not Band-Aids. That was always the goal. It's still the goal at the Romero Institute. And I wanted to say that some of you may recognize this as the Christic Institute symbol, but what it stands for, it is now the Romero symbol. What it stands for is the flame of hope, the omega of resistance, the circle of unity, and peace with justice. So that is where we're coming from in asking you to come together and join with us to do a mission. I would call it a soul mission, a sacred mission. Because we're talking about protecting the Constitution and our constitutional rights, not only for us, but for future generations. And they are under serious threat, which Danny will talk more about. He's a constitutional attorney, very well known, has done many, many cases. And you know, we need to address this because this is happening on our watch while we're alive. And our Constitution is something, it's like, as Danny says, it's a huge, grand experiment in the history of humanity. And we cannot let it erode or be taken away on our watch. It's our job, collectively, to make sure it doesn't happen. It wasn't perfect. It didn't include everyone in the beginning. It gets better as years go on. More people are included. The idea is for it to get stronger, not weaker. And it's a gift that we offer to other countries. No one else has ever had exactly this. It came from here. It came from the United States. So it's under threat, and what we want to do is form a coalition to then form a constitutional protection zone in our city and our county, because the fact of the matter is that the national government right now is not responsive. They passed a law, the National Defense Authorization Law Act, and it is what is the big threat right now to our Constitution and our rights. And they're not in a mood. They're not responsive to changing it. So we're going to have to do it from the ground up. And if we start in Santa Cruz and then we spread from there, and the reason we're videotaping this is because we're going to keep all of our materials, you know, everything that we can just hand to another city and say, this is what we did, please, if it helps you, run with it. And the other project that was similar to this was the organizing that many of you may have been involved in that we did here a few years ago to stop the spraying of our people in the process of them spraying the brown apple moth. And we had a lot of people getting sick, and their children were getting sick, etc. So we organized, and Santa Cruz had the strongest and most effective coalition and organizing effort in the state, and it spread really out of here and went to the Bay Area and Marin and these different places, and finally it stopped. And we had a structure that we engaged in, which we're proposing again here. And we'll talk about that in a little minute after Danny gives us a legal briefing. And we know that if we come together and work collectively in a focused way, we can change things, we can change history. It happened in Santa Cruz with the apple moth, it's happened with other things. This is something we believe. We believe that if we work positively, there's hope. That people make hope happen. People make choices that create injustice. People make choices that create justice. People make choices that create war. People make choices that create peace. It's really up to us. I'm not saying there isn't another dimension. I happen to be a very spiritual person. But on this plane of existence, we've got to decide what we're going to do, what we're going to think, what we're going to say. And if we do that, we contribute in the field to the very things we want to see happen. So we're inviting you, before the end of today, to make a decision. Are you in? Because this is the beginning of a journey that we're going to make together. And I believe it will be a deeply satisfying one, because I do believe this is something that we know in our hearts we need to do.
Thank you, Mom. Thank you for coming. I know it's a gorgeous day, Saturday afternoon, long weekend. Lots of other things that you could be doing right now. So I want to give you just a brief overview of the kind of legal position that we are all in right now. What we are proposing here, and many of us, when I say we, many of us in this room have been involved in participating in developing this particular tactic. This is a tactic that we're advising in response to the enactment of the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012, which we'll discuss briefly, which is very similar to that which we undertook with regard to nuclear power, private nuclear power. When Sarah and I and a number of major national organizations organized and did the Karen Silkwood case back in 1974, 75, we began that. We ended up winning the Karen Silkwood case in Oklahoma and securing a federal ruling that declared unconstitutional the financial cap that the United States Congress had enacted under the whip hand of the major petroleum corporations that owned most of the nuclear power plants, to establish a cap on the potential legal liability of any particular nuclear power plant that melted down or otherwise emitted radioactive nuclides into the community. In order to try to instigate the building of those private facilities by private investors, Congress was persuaded to put a financial cap on the potential damages that they could impose. And the United States government would agree to cover all the rest. What we did in the Silkwood case is we ended up getting that declared unconstitutional. That it was a deprivation of the Sixth Amendment right of a citizen to a jury trial with regard to the amount of damages that they were entitled to if they suffered damages. And as Sarah pointed out, from that point on, there's been no nuclear power plants built in the United States since that date of that decision. But what happened is the 103 at that time, 103 nuclear power plants in the United States moved immediately to try to figure out how to keep the old nuclear reactors still operating, because they had been dumping all of the radioactive nuclear waste on their property. And they were getting ready to have it overflow and be too full, and hoping to build new ones elsewhere. And besides, all of those nuclear facilities were going to be declared obsolete because they only had a limited lifespan in which they could be operated safely. And so what they proposed doing is digging up all of the nuclear waste materials on their sites and shipping them across the country in containers on trucks and trains, and then burying them under a mountain in Nevada, which turned out to be right over the major aquifer of the southwestern United States. But that was what their plan was. And so what we did is we helped with others mobilize around the country to have cities and towns and counties across the land declare their geographic community to be a nuclear-free zone, prohibiting the trafficking of any of these radioactive nuclear materials through their community to this location at Yucca Mountain in Nevada. In one town after another, in Santa Cruz is one of the initial communities that enacted such a resolution, declaring the city of Santa Cruz to be a nuclear-free zone. And so we helped lead the way to do that. So, and it was followed all across the country by other communities, which froze that program in place and disenabled those 103 nuclear power plants from taking those materials off their property. So, and that's why the stopping of the building of more nuclear power plants has basically stopped the spread of nuclear power in the United States. Now, that's what we're proposing doing here in a similar way, is to have the city of Santa Cruz and then our county board of supervisors declare our community to be a constitutional protection zone because of this bizarre law that was passed, the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012. Now, I want to give a brief explanation of this. Virtually every year, the National Congress passes a federal budget. And in that budget, a major portion of it is the National Defense Authorization Act. What they do is they put into one particular statute all of the different things that they want to fund for the military because of the special status that the military budget has in a major imperialist nation such as ourselves. As we've known, that upwards of half of the entire federal budget every year goes to military power of the United States, making it the biggest military power in the history of the human family. And so that they put all of those provisions into one act, and they pass the National Defense Authorization Act every year. Because what they want to do is they want to confront the members of Congress with the requirement that they approve the military, because if they vote against it, then they attack them in their congressional districts and in their Senate seat for being soft in support of the military. And during the entire Cold War, they could accuse them of being soft on communism. But the problem is that with the dissolution of the Soviet Union on December 31st of 1991, the United States lost its ultimate other, to be constantly justifying this massive military budget every single year. Now, I'm not going to, today, in the brief time that I have to share with you, I'm not going to go into the details of what the response was on the part of the George H.W. Bush administration in the face of that particular threat of losing their ultimate enemy, and therefore their rationale for maintaining a major national security state in the United States. That will be part of the subject of a course that I'm going to be teaching starting March 30th up at UCSC. And we're going to be talking there for an entire 10-week period with two-hour classes every week, going into the background and the details of that entire process. And all of you are welcome to attend that class. They have a program that they call long-time learners that you as citizens of the county can sign up for and can participate in that class. It'd be limited to the same equal number of the undergraduates that are in the class, because we don't want to have all the baby boomers just overwhelm their classes up there. So we try to keep an equipoise between us and the millennialists that are in the class. But the bottom line is I'll be covering a lot of that led up to the whole instigation of the so-called terrorist uprising in the Middle East against the United States and, quote, our way of life. But the bottom line is that what we're here to talk about today began, in effect, with the events of September of 2001. September 11th, the whole 9/11 incident of the attack against the trade towers in New York and the United States Pentagon, and allegedly a third plane that was going to try to attack the Congress, the Congressional building. Now, another item that we aren't going to go into today is all of the controversy surrounding that whole issue of 9/11. Who was really responsible for 9/11? Was it really an attack launched from the Middle East against us, etc.? That, again, is going to be part of the course that we're going to be talking about starting on March 30th. We will cover that issue. I'm also not going to be talking about the kind of previous history prior to 9/11 of various forms of repressive legislation that have been enacted at different times during the course of our history. They go back to the Alien and Sedition Acts, the suspension of habeas corpus during the Civil War, the other actions such as the Palmer raids, the anti-communist legislation, the McCarthy period, and all of that. That also will be part of the course that we're going to be having. You may get a sense I'm trying to recruit you guys all to come to this course. I'm not. I'm just really trying to explain to you that it isn't that we don't appreciate all of that history, that we here in this room kind of have some unique knowledge about. But I just want to stay focused on the events of 9/11 as they were portrayed to Congress and to the lawmakers, that generated initially a bill called the Authorization for the Use of Military Force. Now this was the statute that was passed prior to the Patriot Act. This is the statute that was passed on September 18th, just 7 days after the events of 9/11. And this was a very short one-page statute that was passed by the House and Senate, giving authorization to the President, which was really quite peculiar, because it authorized him to use military force against those responsible for the recent attacks launched against the United States. And it said, whereas in light of the threat to the national security of the United States and our foreign policy, it's really important to understand that this wasn't just a response to protecting the national security of the United States. It was an act that was authorizing the President to use military force to protect the foreign policy of the United States. And it says, whereas there is a continued threat of an extraordinary nature to the national security of the United States and to our foreign policy, we hereby state that whereas the President, and this is a very peculiar statement, whereas the President has the authority under the Constitution to take action to deter and prevent acts of terrorism against the United States, we hereby resolve to acknowledge that he has the authority to use military force to protect our national security and our foreign policy. Quite interesting, because actually, if you look through the Constitution of the United States, you don't find any such authority whatsoever given to the President of the United States. The Congress of the United States has the right to declare war. The Congress of the United States has the right to mobilize the military. It has appointed the President of the United States to be the Commander-in-Chief of the military once it's mobilized under an act of war. But nowhere in the Constitution whatsoever is there a place that authorizes the President of the United States to take action to deter and prevent acts against the law. So that in this particular action, drafted by the W. Bush administration, by David Addington in the Vice President's office under Cheney specifically made this move to get Congress in the midst of its kind of fervor in the immediate aftermath of the 9/11 events to do an extraordinary thing, to for the first time authorize the President of the United States to take proactive measures to attempt to stop the violation of law. An entire transfiguration of the concept of law enforcement. Because the one authority, the principal authority that you do see given to the President of the United States in Article 2, in Section 1, is to enforce the laws of the United States. But that does not give him the authority to run around trying to prevent anybody from committing a crime. And yet, in this particular statute, they gave him that authority. And so, it was under the authorization for the use of the military, and the use of military force, that began the process. Because what happened is that under the authorization, the blanket authorization of this, and we'll set aside again for discussion in the class, if you attend the class, the plan that was aggressively and actively underway by the W. Bush administration to launch a military attack into Afghanistan in the middle of October. But the fact of the matter is that what happened is when they got this statute passed authorizing them to use the military force, what they did is they mobilized a major military operation to launch a military attack into Afghanistan. Interestingly enough, one might be a bit puzzled over the fact that the vast majority of everyone who participated allegedly in the attack on the Trade Center and the Pentagon were from Saudi Arabia. And yet there was a decision made to attack Afghanistan. And it was a corollary of a more secret discussion going on to attack Iraq. But again, those are matters for the course that we'll be talking about. But what happened is that under the auspices of this authority to use force, the W. Bush administration began to prepare an entire array of secret executive orders that were moved into place. And he began to take steps such as renditioning people that he suspected of being involved in any way in supporting the Al-Qaeda and other groups, other associate groups. And they began to scoop them up around the world. And they would basically snatch them off the street, shave their head, give them an enema, and bag them in a burlap bag. And then they would abscond with them, and they would take them to secret military detention facilities where they would subject them to enhanced interrogation and torture, with the waterboarding and the locking them in tombs where they couldn't breathe and holding them in there, and the array of other actions you've heard about. And all of these things were being done by executive decree behind the authority of this particular statute, the authorization of the use of force. And then what they did is they passed the Patriot Act. Again, now the Patriot Act, this Patriot Act, this like telephone book-sized book, was actually introduced in October. There was an initial version of it that was introduced on the floor, but it came in October 23rd. Jim Sensenbrenner introduced the House resolution, and they got this thing passed. And this went into great detail, authorizing the president. It amended actually 37 different federal statutes, all in one swoop, authorizing the alteration in the standards for wiretapping, electronic surveillance, for arresting and detaining people, for breaking into people's homes and searching their homes without warrants. An entire panoply of authoritarian measures that they got put into the Patriot Act, which was actually called, just for those of you who don't remember, the USA Patriot Act stands for Uniting and Strengthening America by providing appropriate tools required to intercept and obstruct terrorism. Okay? Again, not to punish terrorism, but but to intercept it and stop it and to obstruct it, to stop it. Again, it was all prospective authority that they had. And so that the wiretapping and electronic surveillance and the scooping up of people off the streets around the world was designed to prevent any future terrorist action. And you've heard the rather startling interviews with Cheney, who has expressly stated that, well, naturally, you don't sit around and wait for them to commit a crime like this, because after all, it could be a mushroom cloud. They could get their hands on one of our previous nuclear devices, for example, that we're the ones that invented, and use them against us. Whereas it's our job to use those things. And so that what they did is they passed the Patriot Act in October, right away. And it gave an entire array of other authorizations to prevent terrorism. Now, a much less well-known event took place in 2006, after W. and Cheney got, quote, reelected in 2004, again, primarily in Florida and Ohio, with the voting machines that we're all aware about. They came back into office with their second term, and they proposed an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act of 2006. And what they did is they inserted into the National Defense Authorization Act, again, using it as a vehicle for sneaking these provisions in under the authority that they're going to be giving to the military to spend the military budget. They inserted an extraordinary section 1076 that you've never heard of. It was Public Law 109-364, that's the 109th Congress, Law number 364. And this was a statute that authorized the deployment of U.S. military troops into the states of the United States, here inside the country, in the event of any act of major terrorism. But it also, as it turned out, included the authorization to send U.S. military troops into any state to enforce local and state laws in the event of any incident or occasion in which the President determines that domestic violence has occurred to such an extent that the constituted authorities of the state are incapable of maintaining public order, or to send in U.S. military troops to suppress in any state any insurrection or unlawful combination or any conspiracy designed to obstruct the due course of the enforcement of state law. Okay? Now, this is an extraordinary piece of legislation. This is setting aside the Posse Comitatus Act entirely, that was passed back in 1878 to stop the deployment of U.S. military forces into the states to establish martial law on the part of the federal government. And what they did is, in a stroke, they set it aside, authorizing the deployment under the guise, again, in the opening sentence of the statute, and to authorize the sending of U.S. military troops in the event of any major nuclear or any terrorist attack. But actually, it was authorizing them as well to go in whenever the President determined that there was any threat of any unlawful combination or conspiracy that might obstruct the normal law enforcement within a state area. And when Congress discovered that they had done that, they immediately repealed it and pulled it back. And that is when the Department of Homeland Security and the Defense Department started taking administrative measures to start sneaking into the cities and states military equipment that the major military would want to have, such as Bearcats. And that they began to offer unilateral grants to police departments and state BCIs, the State Bureau of Criminal Investigation, this massive military equipment, in two different instances, actually involving tanks, sending in tanks for them to have. So this is how this thing happened, this sneaking in these devices to be designed to allegedly prevent acts of terrorism or to combat acts of terrorism, where they would have to be mounted up like a major military unit and armed accordingly. But in fact, you can see that the intention was not to restrict it to be used against acts of terrorism, but to be used against any type of potential insurrection or unlawful combination or conspiracy that threatened to obstruct the normal enforcement of the laws. Okay? So this is the process that we were confronted with from 2006 all the way up to 2008 when Obama was elected. And so Obama, as you remember, was talking about how awful the Patriot Act was and how it had to be radically amended and it had to be changed and all of that. But when in fact he got into office, he discovered that having access to those kind of authorities, which he could blame on W, and Addington and the rest of the guys that passed it, all he had to do is not take any steps to change it, because as it turned out, even though the original Patriot Act had a sunset clause on it that mandated that it expire in 2005, what happened is in July of 2005, amendments started to be proposed to do away with the sunset clause, which they did. They eliminated the sunset clause that was supposed to come into operation in 2005, and they simply just woodenly extended the entire Patriot Act and the authorization for the use of force. And even though they didn't get away with sneaking this provision in permanently in 2006, they started sneaking it in through the back door by moving military equipment in and training police departments to function as military units. Not just to protect us against terrorism, but to protect against any type of civil disturbance or insurrection or any combination that might threaten to challenge local law enforcement. And so what happened then is we come to the National Defense Authorization Act, the annual enactment of this National Defense Authorization Act. And what happened is in 2011, after Obama came to office, there was a proposal made by the right-wing Republicans in the House of Representatives to insert these sections 1021 and 1022. These are the big provisions. We talk about opposing the National Defense Authorization Act, but like 98% of the entire bill is just like every other National Defense Authorization Act, authorizing the funding of all these military bases, and they name them all, and the different weapons systems and stuff that they want to get to finance. But they use it as a vehicle for sneaking in these special provisions under the color of anti-terrorism. And this section 1021 and 1022, they got snuck in to the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012. Specifically, they undertake this action explicitly asserting that the president basically already has all this authority under this general one-page authorization for the use of military force. One single little page stating that in light of the fact that the president has the authority under the Constitution to take action to deter and prevent terrorism, this one paragraph that they passed, they say, oh well, in light of the fact that the president already has this authority, let's try to clarify it. So what they do is they state in section 1021, they say that it says, affirming the authority of the president to use all necessary and appropriate force pursuant to the authorization for the use of military force, that is, the 2001 law passed, including the authority for the armed forces of the United States to arrest and detain covered persons, as defined in subsection B, pending disposition under the law of war. So you ask yourself, where did that authority come from? That authority came from the fact that H.W. Bush was already doing it. He was doing it solely through a unilateral executive action. So what this was designed to do was to get Congress to consent to what it was that he was doing. Now this is the same thing that John Yoo, that some of the people that were in David Addington's staff under Vice President Cheney were the ones writing all of these statutes. And John Yoo, who's teaching up at Berkeley, to the shame of us all, is up there. he actually wrote a book called The National Security Constitution. And what he argued in the book was that if in fact the president undertakes a series of unilateral executive actions and Congress comes to know about it and doesn't do anything to stop him from doing it, it's in effect like a common law consent on the part of Congress to that kind of activity. And that was how they were conducting themselves all the way through the W. Bush administration. Because they were notifying certain people. They selected a certain little group of people from the House and Senate, the Intelligence Committee, and then they were putting them under absolute oath not to tell anybody in the world about it, and then they would tell them that they were doing these things. And then they were turning around and asserting that that gave them the authority to continue to do it, because now Congress knew about it and they had effectively consented to it. So that they had basically deprived the Congress of the United States, that has the sole exclusive constitutional authority to make war, that they had put them into a completely passive role of simply being notified about it, and just a tiny handful of them, placing them under oath to not say a word about it to anybody, and using that as the rationale that now they've been authorized by Congress to do this. So what they decided to do is in 2012, they were going to, now that they had Obama in office, that most everybody trusted, and I used the past tense on that, that everybody trusted him. So when we heard about these right-wingers in the House of Representatives introducing this bill, this specifically covered any person and authorized the arrest and detention by United States military forces of any person, which includes Americans, in arresting any person who plans, authorized, or committed, or aided in the terrorist attacks of September 11th of 2001. Okay? People go, okay. Or who harbored those responsible for such attacks, or any person who substantially supported Al-Qaeda or the Taliban, okay, or associated forces that are engaged in hostilities against the United States, or any of its coalition partners, including any person who has directly supported any of those hostilities and given any substantial assistance to any of those organizations. Now, that's the operative language that went in under Section 1021. That's the one where everybody started saying, wait a second, does this cover Americans? It says any person and any place where they want to swoop them up and take them into custody. Doesn't require any finding of probable cause by any judicial branch. In fact, doesn't allow them to have any judicial hearings. Doesn't allow them the right of habeas corpus. So it suspends the right of habeas corpus, which is one of the most fundamental rights that are included in the Constitution for every citizen in the country. Nobody can be detained or arrested by any executive branch official unless they're brought before an independent judicial magistrate, and the executive branch is compelled to demonstrate what the information is that would cause any reasonable person to believe that that person had already committed a specific crime. Now, you can see why they don't want that to happen, because they don't believe they have to prove that they've committed any crime. They just want to detain them and arrest them if they suspect they might be thinking of doing such a crime, or if they gave any substantial support of any kind to any person who was thinking of committing such a crime. So you can see how attenuated this kind of authority is getting now to go after people like this.
Hedges in the city.
That's right. That's what I was getting right to now. And so, thank you. So what happened is a number of citizens, Chris Hedges, Dan Ellsberg, and a number of others, all gathered together, people that were aggressive critics of American foreign policy under H.W. Bush and W. Bush, and continuing now under Obama. What they did is they gathered together and they filed a federal lawsuit in New York City, in the federal court, and said, look, this language here is so overbroad and vague. You know, what does it mean? Anybody who has provided any substantial support for any associated organization of any person who has given any support for any of these groups, you know, does that include us, who, for example, Chris Hedges, who was a journalist, he said, I've interviewed any number of people from the Taliban. And perhaps if I wrote an article that demonstrated or displayed any type of sympathy whatsoever for any of their positions, does that mean I could be swept off the street with no probable cause and incarcerated with no right to trial, no right to an attorney, could be put in front of a military tribunal and permanently incarcerated in a military detention facility? With no notice to any of my relatives, with no charges made against me, no right to confront my accusers. Is that what that means? So they come before the federal court, and they were seeking a federal declaratory judgment to declare the statute unconstitutional to the extent to which it might be applied against them. And so the judge, the federal district court judge, an appointee of Obama, said to the United States Attorney from the Southern District of New York, okay, listen, these people are all here asserting that they have a reasonable fear of being swept up under this statute. And I would have to rule, if they were subjected to this kind of treatment, I'd have to rule as to whether or not this statute is unconstitutional because it violates their First Amendment rights. Freedom of speech, freedom to criticize, freedom to associate, to communicate with any of the people that you might have put on one of your lists. And the United States Attorney, she said, all you have to do to get rid of this lawsuit is just tell us officially that these people wouldn't be covered. And he said, I'm afraid I can't do that. I cannot say that they would not be covered. And they were very specific about the kinds of actions that they were talking about, interviewing them, writing articles, publicly criticizing the administration, etc. And he explicitly said that he was not able to say that wouldn't be covered under this statute, and that they couldn't be swept off the street and permanently incarcerated. And so she declared it to be unconstitutional. Unconstitutionally vague, unconstitutionally overbroad, and a direct violation of the First Amendment if it was going to be applied against them. At which point they immediately appealed to the Circuit Court of Appeals, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, that reversed her and declared that there was no standing on the part of these people, despite the fact that the U.S. Attorney expressly acknowledged that he was insisting that they be perceived as being subject to this application of the statute. And they said, look, we're not going to rule on the constitutionality of it. They just don't have any standing to object to it. And so what happened is that was passed. It was signed into law. Well, first thing that happened, we heard that it was getting ready to be done. The right-wing people in the House of Representatives, which is a little redundant actually, most of the right-wing House of Representatives itself, actually put in this proposal to have this statute go into effect. And what happened is we started contacting ACLU and other people around the country going, this is horrible, this is dreadful. And everybody kept saying, look, this is so ridiculous. You know, the House, even the regular Republicans aren't going to support this in the House. But of course, the regular Republicans in the House started being challenged by the extreme right-wing people in the House saying, you're soft on terrorism. If you don't support this bill, you're soft on terrorism. And so the regular Republicans went along with it, saying, well, the Democrats aren't going to support this. The Democrats in the House won't support this. So we don't have a big enough majority to win this thing. And so what happened is the blue dogs in the House of Representatives, those Republicrats, you know, they ended up saying, look, I've got a conservative district. I'm just barely holding on by the skin of my teeth. I'm going to vote for this. Because the liberals and the moderates in the Democratic Party, certainly in the House, aren't going to vote for this. And so what happened is when the Democrats started jumping ship and starting to support it, along with the reactionary Republicans and the moderate Republicans, and now the moderate Democrats did it, what happened is the rest of the moderate Democrats said, I don't want to get tagged for being soft on terrorism. You know, the same exact kind of paranoid activity that the congressmen and the senators used to have about communism. They didn't want to be tagged as soft on communism. Basically, they don't want to be tagged as soft on the ultimate other. Whoever the ultimate other is, that the executive branch happens to identify as the enemy of the hour. And so they didn't want to do that. And so they then caved in. And it turns out that they ended up 90 Democratic congressmen opposed it in the House, but 95 Democratic congresspeople joined together with all 227 of the Republicans and voted to enact it. And we all started going, wow, running around with our hair on fire, saying, this is terrible. And of course, most of the organizations in the country, believing that there were still rational rules that were applying, said, don't worry about it. The Senate, which is under the control of Democrats, certainly will not approve this. Well, it turns out that when it went into the Senate, 45 Democrats voted yes, and 40 Republicans voted yes, and it turns out more Democrats than Republicans voted for it. And there were only 6 Democratic senators in the entire United States Senate who voted against it, which did not include either one of our U.S. senators. Barbara Boxer voted for it, and so did Feinstein. And Feinstein actually went so far as to say, look because of some language that's in section 1022, which I only told you about 1021, the authorization to sweep up people and incarcerate them. There's a section 1022 which says, oh, by the way, when you arrest anybody under section 1021, you have to house them in a military detention facility, where, of course, they can be subjected to enhanced interrogation. And so they had a mandatory provision in there that when you arrest anybody under section 1021, you have to incarcerate them in a military detention facility where they can be gotten at by the interrogators. And then pressure got put on to say, well, wait a second, you can't do that. You have to give some authorization to have Americans excluded from that. And so they put in a provision in there saying that the mandate to put them into a military detention facility didn't necessarily apply to Americans, which means that they could put them into the military detention facilities, but if the president ordered them not to be kept in that facility, he had the authority to let them be in a civilian facility. But it doesn't mean that Americans were not subject to being arrested under section 1021. And so what happened is, because of the confusion that was being caused, because a lot of the people around the country were going, oh, look at this language in section 1022. It says very clearly that this authority to detain a person in military custody does not extend to citizens of the United States. And they were trying to confuse everybody about this, just like they do with the popular referenda in our state here. And they were trying to confuse them. So Senator Feinstein put in a proposed amendment expressly excluding American citizens from being arrested under this provision. And it was rejected on the grounds that Americans should be subject to this. And so that we know perfectly well that not only that it covers Americans, but that both Boxer and Feinstein knew that it covered Americans, and they still voted for it. Okay? And so the Senate has, and everybody kept saying then is, don't worry, Obama will veto this. Okay? But that was the reason they put it inside the National Defense Authorization Act, because they put it in there at the last hour in December, and unless the president signs it into law, then there's no money, there's no financing available for the whole military. And that was the tactic that they used. And so Obama, at 11:55 p.m. on New Year's Eve of 2011, signs the law into law. Okay? And what happened is, immediately people started freaking out around the country and talking about doing something about it. But very importantly, it turns out that the Santa Cruz City Council, in April of 2012, 4 months later, was the very first city council in the entire country to pass a resolution against it. And it was introduced by Don Lane. It was seconded by Ryan Coonerty, and was co-sponsored by Catherine Beers. And they put it into the city council, and it was passed unanimously. But all that it called for was to say that they were stating that it was their judgment that it was unconstitutional, and they wanted to call for its repeal, and they were affirming the principle of providing to all persons within our jurisdiction of the city of Santa Cruz all of the constitutionally recognized due process rights and other fundamental rights guaranteed to them by our state and federal constitutions. So they said that. They were the very first ones on board actually saying that. Then a number of other city councils around the country, Albany, New York, in October 2012, Oxford, Massachusetts, on October 9th of 2012, on the 23rd of October, Webster, Massachusetts, in a number of 125 cities have been talking about passing resolutions, but they're afraid to say so because they're afraid that it will look like they're soft on terrorism. Okay? But what happened, very importantly, and this is one of the things that even we didn't realize, but it turns out that the state assembly here in California on February 13th of 2013, this is basically a year after the statute has been put into authority, the California State Assembly passed a bill, House Assembly Bill 351, by a vote of 71-1, that actually declared it to be a criminal offense for any federal official to attempt to come into the state of California and enforce either Section 1021 or 1022. And made it a criminal offense for any official or law enforcement officer of the state of California to participate in any manner whatsoever in attempting to enforce either of these provisions. Now, that was an extraordinary, and they went on to point out in great length all of the specific constitutional provisions that these two provisions of the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012 violated. They go right straight down through the First Amendment and the Fourth Amendment and the Sixth Amendment right to counsel, the 14th Amendment right to due process and being notified of what the charges are against you and get to confront your accusers. All of the major rights are listed in the State Assembly bill legislation. And they then included, at the end of that whole provision, making it a criminal offense to try to enforce it in California, they had a more general statement saying, it is the policy of the state to refuse to provide material support for or to participate in any way with the implementation within our state of sections 1021 or 1022 of the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012. And they said that. Now what happened is after the state assembly passed that, that's our House of Representatives, the state Senate took up the bill, and they, for some bizarre reason, which we still need through our research subcommittee to figure out here, that they wanted to get a totally unanimous vote of the Senate agreeing to oppose the bill. So what they did is they watered it down until they got a 37-0 vote in the Senate. But they only ended up stating that it shall be the policy of the state to refuse to provide material support for or participate in any way in the implementation of either of these statutes. And no local law enforcement agency or local municipal government or the employee of that agency or government acting in his or her official capacity shall use state funds or funds allocated by the state or local entities to participate in the enforcement of this statute. Okay? So now that's meaningful. That's meaningful. It's prohibiting the officials from participating in it in any way. But in fact, it's removed the criminal sanctions against the state officials, and it's removed the criminal sanctions against the federal officials coming in. And so the bottom line is that there's no teeth in it. Even though it does provide that anybody who receives a notice that there's going to be any such activity are required to notify the Attorney General of the state. Okay? Now, so what we're proposing is that in light of the fact that our City Council took the first steps to oppose it officially, in light of the fact that our State Assembly just voted 71-1 to make it a criminal offense for any federal official to come in to try to enforce it, and a criminal offense for any state official or law enforcement officer to participate within, what we want to do is we've proposed a resolution, which you can get from our office, a resolution which in fact provides the following, that it shall be unlawful for any officer, law enforcement officer, or any official or any employee of the city of Santa Cruz to participate in any way whatsoever. So instead of just saying it's the policy that they shall not do it, we have them declare that it as a means of enforcing the statute, enforcing the policy that's already been adopted by the state legislature. That our city is going to implement it by notifying all of its employees and law enforcement officials that in fact it shall be unlawful for them to participate in any way. And in fact, it will be a condition of their continued future employment. That if they receive any such notice, they have to immediately contact every single member of the city council and notify her or him that they've received information that indicates that there's going to be some attempt to enforce this inside our city. And that the city council, pursuant to the resolution, would be required to immediately convene and to take every step necessary to identify who the potential target of such a procedure is, and that they are to provide to that person a full hearing with our judicial officials, to have them brought before the judicial officials and to contact the federal authorities and the state authorities and to say, if you have any evidence that this person has committed any crime, that you are compelled at this time to come before a magistrate, and this person will be provided every single one of the due process rights here in our county and here in our city, because this is a constitutional protection zone. And in fact, if you have any case to make, you get here and you make it. Or else that person is going to be declared to be not subject to your authority. And the resolution would then require that our city officials contact Governor Jerry Brown and insist that this person be given the protection of the governor of the state and our Attorney General to protect that person against any enforcement of this statute. Very simple, quite lawyer-like, but in fact very specific provisions to put teeth and enforcement in the very policy that's already been announced by our state legislature. And in fact, that it's even less onerous than the criminal sanctions that the state assembly has voted 71-1 to impose upon them. So we're their best friends. You know, we're here trying to help out the police officers and stuff to keep them from being put in prison for this. We're trying to, it's just a condition of their future employment with us, that they have to notify and not participate in any way in enforcing 101, 121, or 122, 1021 and 1022. But in fact, they in fact have to contact the city council. So we're putting all the burden on the city council to take the affirmative steps which we've explicated to provide judicial protection for our people. And then we're going to ask if we can get it through when we get it through the city council, to then move to the board of supervisors to have it done on a county-wide level. And then what we want to do is move through the other counties, to get the other counties in the state to do this one after another, the cities and counties, and then have our entire state move back up to the level that was indicated by the state assembly to make it a criminal offense in the state to try to enforce that. To become the first state in the nation that basically absolutely refuses to participate and in fact makes it a criminal offense to try to come in here to enforce it. Okay? And then we can move to the other states one by one. Okay? So that's the task before us. That was my brief legal review of
Hello. I want to thank Tatanka as well as Danny for his presentation and for Tatanka playing music. Isn't he wonderful? There's a great atmosphere. Okay, so Danny, you had to do a little more time into that because not everyone has been at the other events. And we need to get that converted really into some document or video or something that can be easily used by people because we won't be able to do it over and over again. Now our schedule's off in terms of our time. So I think maybe what we're going to do, we were going to have, first of all I want to ask you a couple questions. Right? So because we want some feedback. I want to go over this document that I've put together on what is our mission, what is our strategy, what are our tactics, what are our logistics, and what are our committees, our constituency committees, and what are our task committees. I'm going to read this. Our mission is to come together in Santa Cruz County in a broad coalition. But I want to know, after I do this, I want to know whether you have any additions to this. You know, do you want any additions to this or to the committees? Right, so if you would just kind of listen to this and say, well, yeah, I would add this or whatever. So, because we need to have some sort of document that represents what we're doing here, that we can then hand to new people as they come, because we want to build this coalition to be very big. All right.
Sarah,
To come.
I'm sorry. Can you ask, does everyone have that sheet? Is anyone missing? It's in here.
Okay, our mission is to come together in Santa Cruz County in a broad coalition to defend and protect our United States Constitution and our rights under it to free speech, free assembly, freedom of religion, right to an attorney, and trial by peers, and all other constitutional rights. To protect this sacred ground, this sacred trust, this grand experiment in the history of humanity, for us and for our children and grandchildren. And to work in a spirit of honesty, respect for others, inclusiveness, and focus on the goal. To offer our materials to other cities and counties and encourage them to begin this mission in their area. That's what I'm proposing as a mission statement. Strategy, what would be our strategy? Okay, what's our goal? Persuade the City Council and the Board of Supervisors of Santa Cruz County to pass an ordinance making our county a constitutional protection zone. Provide all of our materials and documents to other cities and counties in California to launch their own local efforts and reach out nationally to do the same. Tactics, so tactically, what do we do to actually implement this? Build a broad coalition, generate thousands of petition signatures, win the support of citizens, initiate a large event, have one in mind. You guys may have other ones in mind. Possibly initiate a canvassing effort. Research, educate, organize, and communicate. Multiply our numbers methodically. Educate, recruit key organizations and constituencies in our area, as well as the general public. Ask all groups to officially join our coalition. Ask all people to sign our petition. The petition is really our growing individual base. The coalition is our growing organizational base. And we'll need all of that when we go to the council or to the Board of Supervisors. Organize the support and help of attorneys and other leaders, this is a legal issue, who have influence on the elected leaders. Organize people to be ready to attend the City Council meeting and the Board of Supervisors meeting en masse with cameras. Focus on our unity around this goal and set aside our differences. Build a community around this goal. This is a very important point, that we have to set aside our differences to do this. Because we want as many people in our tent, is that how you say it? As possible in our basket. We want as many people with us as will join with us. And that we may not agree on other things. We may have other issues where we don't agree, but it's important that we focus on this together, because this is for all of us. These rights are for everyone. So then we get to distribute our ordinance and our materials to other cities. Okay, logistics. Now, obviously with logistics, without logistics, everything falls apart. It's so important. It's the detail work, it's the administrative work, it's the database systems, it's the printing and putting together agendas, all this. But basically, I wanted to add something else here, because this is logistics for all of us. Pay attention to the details and do what we say we will do. Do not let our teammates down. Stay connected and organized and coordinate with the details. Maintain communication, provide materials, and produce materials for educational efforts and events. Show up at meetings. It isn't only the goal and the tactics, it's how we implement it. Be kind, be focused, be committed, be honest, be sincere, stay on course, and do not get distracted. Learn the educational material well enough to be able to persuade others and become a speaker if you can. I don't know if that really is what you put under logistics, but I just wanted to put it there, because I think it's something we can all reflect on. We've all been in groups, we've all been in movements, we've done this, most of, well, some of us are older than others. I've been more than you have. But so I put those suggestions in because we all know it does make a difference what we do, not just what we say. So that now, as far as committees, we've got two kinds of committees that we're going to need to have in this effort. One are constituency committees, and the other is task committees. Now, I don't know that it will always, I don't know exactly how this is going to work, but I think probably with our constituency committees, once we join them, It may be that they don't have to meet all the time, that a coordinator can just communicate with them by email or something like that. But we do need to know who's in what constituencies. What I mean by that is, okay, all the lawyers, that's a constituency. You know, all the people in religious communities who are active in their religious communities or connected, who are priests or ministers or nuns or rabbis, that's a constituency. The nonprofits, there's lots of nonprofits here, that's a constituency. The labor and unions, business, very important constituency. Law enforcement and fire department, elected officials, veterans, new age, surfers/athletes, youth, students, academic, education. So these kinds of constituencies, why are they important, right? Why do we need to know? Because if I'm active in the religious constituency, I can get together with other people who are, and we can figure out how we're going to expand our outreach into those constituencies. Who do we know? Where are we connected? Who do we think we can bring in to join us that will help expand in that outreach in that community? And what ideas do we bring to the table that could help us with our materials? Because it may be that certain constituencies want our materials to include certain kinds of things, because it makes it easier for them to reach out to the people in their constituency. You kind of follow me, okay? So that's one kind of committee or networking that we want to do. The other is task committees. And what we're proposing for the different task committees are legal, educational, social, media, organizing and outreach, media, research, fundraising and canvassing, students and youth, art, music and graphics, administration and tech. So what I want to ask you is, does that all sound okay with you? I mean, do you have other suggestions that you want to make, and other things you want to say about everything you've heard today, really? Yes?
I mean, it doesn't mention people of color of any sort.
Well, we can do that. If you want to, yeah, we were thinking more of...
Could you repeat?
Yes, what he said is we don't have any constituencies that are specifically people of color. We can do that. And I think it's important, certainly the Hispanic community. They're very important. Okay? So, Hispanic, Asian, African American, Native American. Okay. Any others? Yes?
What about peace?
Peace?
Are people the same as New Age?
It's different. Peace is probably not the same as New Age. This is a lot of traditional religious people in Vancouver. Yes?
It's just a small suggestion, it may be just me, but a constituency committee isn't terribly clear to me, but an affinity group, or affinity committees, because they're people who are in spirit, like-minded, and concerned, and involved. Makes a little bit more sense for me. It's
Affinity committee.
affinity, yeah,
Mhm.
because these are people that
Yes. Okay, that's fine with me. I'm not committed to it being constituency. Barbara?
Yeah, where would strategy be under task committee?
Oh, right.
I mean, it's really important to have new ideas and a big picture.
Right. So we need a strategic committee to make sure that we stay on point.
Should that be organizing? That would be under organizing?
That would be under tasks.
strategic.
It's different.
Well,
I mean, it's different than organizing. It's not the same thing as organizing.
oh, you're putting strategic under organizing?
No, it's separate.
I'm somewhat confused by the constituency committee idea. Is this a group that I'm a part of the group, or is it a group that I'm going to outreach to? And to me, it's like, I know folks with all these groups, but I'm not strong in any of them, or who, if I'm categorizing myself, it just seems like I would outreach to everyone I know.
Yes.
So I don't really see myself joining a group to say I'm going to outreach to everyone I even research.
Yeah.
There's an outreach.
There's an organizing outreach committee, but I know it gets a little confusing because we have these two plans. And what you're talking about doing is, you know, if you're an individual who is involved and you want to reach out to everyone you know, that's what we want all people to do. There are people who are very involved with different constituencies. You know, like Jose's not here, but he's very involved with the labor movement. So he would say, if you ask him what constituency is he most associated with and working with, he would say labor. There are other people who are definitely involved in the business community. They go to the meetings, you know, and all this stuff. So if that's what we mean by the affinity or the constituency groups, is if you are part of a constituent, Steve is ACLU. And he would say, I'm sure, that he was involved with the ACLU as a constituency if you ask him about his constituency.
Just put in a general outreach committee.
Well, there is. In the task committees, there's a general outreach. There's an organized...
Well, you got organizing and outreach. You put it in a separate one for people who want to contact all their friends.
Well, organizing and outreach are really the same thing. They're just people use different words for it. But these task committees are where you come together. It doesn't make any difference what constituency you're from, what anything you're from. You just come together because you want to work on outreaching to people or organizing people to get them to do things. And then if you want to join the education task committee, that's because you want to work on materials that you can use to educate people. If you write them, maybe make a video, maybe do audio with other people, but you're concerned about getting the ideas articulated and available to people. Hi.
Hi. I have a friend that's elderly. Maybe that would be a better thing.
The seniors? Seniors? Okay. Seniors. Okay. Yes.
Hi, I'm Mark Lee. I was recently, I guess, assigned or elected to the Democratic Party caucus. And we'll be meeting in May to establish caucus planks for the state races of the Democratic Party. So I think you ought to have some kind of linkage to the Democratic Party, particularly locally.
We're putting both outreach to the Democratic and the two Republicans.
Well, the Green Party.
Does have elected officials. I think this is terrific. I think we should definitely have a language put together. Yeah.
Party outreach.
I'm sorry, I missed what you said.
I was just thinking, as long as we're outreaching to a political party, we might as well include the Greens and the Libertarians as well.
Yeah.
Because I don't know how many people here are Greens, but I'm a Green. Who else here is a Green? We have a few Greens. Wonderful. Former Green.
Okay, there's a constituency right there. The Greens are here. Yeah.
Political party outreach.
Yeah. We don't have, percentage-wise, we have many fewer Republicans in this county than we have independents and Democrats. But there are a lot of libertarian folks, and they're kind of an interesting mix of they're for civil liberties. They're much more conservative on economics than a lot of other people. But when it comes to civil liberties, they should support those. I think they will.
Along those lines, there's a group called the Freedom Forum.
Yes, I know.
Rising outreach.
Will you handle that one?
Yes, actually, it's very peculiar. I keep getting invited to talk to these people all the time. Yeah.
Well,
I forgot what I'm doing is causing that, but it's...
No, it's CPZ, because some of them support CPZ already. They support it. I'm sorry?
They had a forum on CPZ several months ago.
Yeah, and this is a perfect example of what I was talking about earlier. This is a coalition. We want everybody to support this. So, we may not agree on a lot of other issues. So,
Sarah,
yes.
I don't see anywhere in here where it mentions nonpartisan. Do we want to just say it right out? It's everybody.
It is
Is that the
everybody.
right word? Nonpartisan?
Yes. Yeah, for sure. People don't have to be affiliated with anything.
You don't have to be a Democrat.
You just be a person.
This is just humanistic.
Yeah, you can say nonpartisan outreach to political parties.
I think that the political stuff should be inclusive because this is something that cuts across all party lines.
Yeah.
And I think when we start putting up barriers like that, we're falling into to a big hole.
Yeah, so nonpartisan political party outreach.
Okay.
And that word of nonpartisan maybe should be put in the mission statement.
Yes. Got it? I think you're right. Good. Any other suggestions? Okay. So, what we need to do, because of our time, we have to end on time. You have to be able to count on that. We have an hour. We have now about an hour and 15 minutes, hour and 20 minutes. So what we're thinking is, what Christy said, why don't we not have any constituency meetings? Because when she was talking with people as you guys were coming in, she said most people were not affiliating with any particular constituency. So, you know, those of you, let me put it this way, those of you who are affiliated with constituencies, like the Greens and the ACLU, and there may be others, it would be great if you would...
We have
the
sign-up sheets for constituencies.
We just need to know it. We need to know it.
So
Yeah.
we can lay them out here, and if you feel like you want to sign up a particular constituency, we'll have them laid out here and you can sign up.
How does this constituency thing become important? I'll tell you how it does. There's two tools that we have for organizing. It's a complicated issue because of the history of the NDA and everything, but it's going to be a simple organizing strategy. We have two tools. We have a petition, and we want resolutions passed for people and organizations to join the coalition. Why? Because when we go eventually to the city council and when we go to the board of supervisors, we want to have a lot of organizations, businesses, everything in this coalition, and we want a lot of individuals who have signed the petition. Because elected leaders have to pay attention when there gets to be a certain number of organizations and people involved. You know, it just because they're all voters and the elected leaders, you know, it gets to a point where they have to pay attention. I'm not saying they're not going to pay attention and that we're going to have to hammer them. I'm just saying the right way to organize, if you want elected leaders to do something, is to organize their voting base. And so that's why in our research committee, we're going to want to know what is the voter base of the people who are in it? Who elected them? Who paid for their campaigns? Who are they most beholden to? Both in the city council and in the board of supervisors. We're going to have to know all that. And in terms of these constituencies, we might say, okay, so-and-so wrote down that they were part of the Greens. We can call that person and say, is there any way that we can have a speaker come to the next Green meeting? And that speaker could nutshell this and also propose a resolution be passed that the Green Party joins the coalition. So, but in order to do that, we have to have somebody help us have a speaker put on the agenda for a constituency or an organization. So if somebody is from the Resurrection Catholic Church, we can ask them, can we make a presentation? And when we make a presentation, can we propose that your community, your church community, join this coalition? But so that's why we're interested in knowing your constituency access. It's just that simple. And then when it comes to the petition, we're going to want all of our task committees, all of our constituency people, everybody's going to be thinking about how can I get more petitions signed? How can I get more organizations to join this coalition? That's individuals and organizations. And you know, how can I figure out how more people can understand it so the public understands this? That's kind of basically what we're doing.
One of the things that in the past has been very helpful is having a database about who inside organizations you contact for information, who it is in the group that has some kind of a relationship with that organization, when do they meet, what are their goals, and it's basically like doing a sociogram of the county, and it's really effective. It was surprising to me how sometimes just a little effort here with somebody had a big payoff. And I think that's kind of what you're going for is using how this county, I mean, everything here is done by people to people. It's amazing what can be done with just, 4 or 5 phone calls sometimes.
Did you say, I missed a little bit of that, but did you say that they put all that together?
It's creating a database of some sort that.
Oh, we have to put it together.
Yeah, well, but it's organizing it almost like I don't know whether you know what a sociogram is, but it's little quads and things. It's not linear. It's not vertical. It's a matrix. It's a map.
This sounds wonderful. This sounds like something that could happen in the organizing outreach committee.
Yeah, it's fun to do because it's surprising who could speak to who. I showed up at a Republican women's speaker thing, and they invited me to be on their platform committee because they didn't realize my friend that brought me was having a hissy fit because she knows my politics, but they like my ideas, and and when the focus is on better, it's so much easier, and everybody wants to get to better.
Right. I hope you'll be in the organizing committee.
Yeah.
Because this is a really good idea.
Yeah.
And because it's just like we have to understand who the elected leaders really are and who helped get them in and all that kind of stuff. We have to understand who's here.
Who's doing what and who's willing to, who's willing to take a stand with us.
I was just going to make a suggestion. It's only something small, but task committees, there's quite a few of them, and I was thinking that you could probably combine some of them. I was thinking of marketing, social media, educational material, art, music, graphics, media. It's all kind of really under that marketing communications banner, if you think about it. It's creating the materials, it's the social media aspect of it, it's all the messaging. So I kind of call it marcoms, really.
So you're saying educational, social media, marketing, and...
So saying the educational, social media one, the media one, the art, music, graphics one, all kind of come under marketing communications.
Do you agree?
I agree.
He agrees. That's a pretty big committee. All right, so let me just say one thing about this.
That's interesting to see how many people are in it. And then
Yeah.
but there's not.
So I think between all those, there's actually a lot of coordination about communication, messaging, graphics, marketing, and what's you're saying media, what's totally separate committees.
Marketing.
What can be a part of it?
Let's do it. That's right.
I have something I'd like to say. It's not that I don't think that's possibly a very good idea. It's just that in the nonpartisan nature and the very grassroots nature of this type of effort, which is so important because it could quickly be seized by certain groups in the community and used as a very partisan effort. So, in a way, I'm a little resistant toward too much combining of the tasks. It's more of an intuitive feeling, but I was raising my hand and I wanted to say something. Messaging in terms of repetitive message that goes out to the community over and over and over again, I think is extremely important, and that there's going to be overlap in the communities. For example, going to be working on canvassing and fundraising, which obviously canvassing is a form of outreach. It's one of the most grassroots forms of outreach. So in a way, that should be logically combined with the outreach committee. So really, I just wanted to say that I think it's important that we understand that even though we're dividing into committees, we're still going to be working together. But I do think that if we do too much combining too fast, that we might, and again, this is not a direct opposition to what you're saying, but just I want us to kind of proceed in a processing mode. In other words, I'd rather have us kind of be in smaller groups and coming together and forming larger groups over time than too much just like warehousing right from the get-go. And then, you see what I'm saying? And people left out and think. Because I think in order to keep the message as broad-based and non-partisan as possible, we really all need to really think about messaging, elevator speeches, canvassing routes, what we're going to say to different groups. But we also kind of have to make sure that we are using our diversity on these views to not make the messaging, on the one hand, like I'm saying, we want to repeat a message that's pretty streamlined, but we don't want to make it too easy for anybody to co-opt. Like, I could be specific, but politically there are some fault lines here. I mean, one of the reasons we got the NDAA to begin with is because of political fault lines. And what I'm saying is I just want to resist a certain tendency to too much, combining and end up with a monolithic kind of thing.
Let me say this. We may be talking about something. Let me ask you this. Yeah, it doesn't at this point. Sarah, how many people right now would sign up for a committee that was art, music, and graphics? Raise your hand, please.
That was what? Art, music, and graphics.
Use the microphone. Use the microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry. Art, music, and graphics. There are 4 people here that would sign up for that. Okay.
But is that the only one you want to sign up
4
for?
people. Okay, that's very interesting. Yeah.
Can I say something real quick?
Yes, I'm sorry.
So what we can do, we do have classrooms set aside. So if you want to start right now by combining the media and the art and the graphics and the education, you can all just go into one classroom, and from there we can choose to split into separate committees or maybe to stay together as a whole and start from there until we build enough momentum to separate the tasks.
That's a definite idea. Okay, now let me ask the other ones. How many people here would want to be in a legal committee? 1, 2. We have to reach 4.
Does that include strategy?
How many would be in the education and social media and marketing committee? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, and how many would be in research? There's about 5 or 7 there. And how many would be in fundraising and canvassing? These would be 2, 3. Okay, and I'm seeing that there's at least 6 there as well. How about students and youth? We're going to expand this. We're going to expand that. There's 3, 4, 5. Okay, we may have 5 or 6 there as well. And administration and tech. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6.
Question: what is administration and tech?
Okay, administration and tech. Everything falls apart without it. Is the database system, so we can communicate easily with one another. Chris is our webmaster, and he is the one sending out the emails to you, and Christy is working with other people to make sure everybody's names get in there so we can communicate with one another. They're keeping track of the petitions that are coming in, making sure they go into the online petition list so that we have a petition list, we have a list from the Hedges event, we have a list from the April 3rd event. Somebody has to keep track of all this, or otherwise our numbers don't keep growing. And we lose people. So that team is very much involved in the nitty-gritty, and that's also producing materials. They print everything that you have here has been printed by them. And it doesn't have to just be our staff at Romero, it can be a committee. And that team may be able to help with tech problems. It may have access to printers that are free. Lots of things happen when the tech people and the administrative people get together to figure out. But they basically keep us organized, keep our feet on the ground, and make sure that we have our data straight.
You left out the organizing and outreach?
Well, that's ridiculous. How many people would be in that? Okay,
Can you only join in one committee, is that right?
well, that's one of the tricky things that's happening here. We have people, I can see that we have people who want to be in more than one committee. When we were doing the Apple Month, I used to go to 4 different committee meetings. So you can go to more than one as we go forward, but if we all divide up today, I think, here's what I would suggest. I would suggest that we follow Kim's suggestion, and we put education, marketing, social media, art, music, and graphics, your suggestion, all in one of the rooms.
Which will be the last room.
But I think there's some overlap in the people that want to be in them anyway. So if all, that's going to be, how are people going to find these rooms?
Actually, they can come with us.
Okay.
You say that, where'd you number those again, please?
Education, marketing, and social media. Media, now that's press. Right? So the first grouping is more like educational materials and social media messages going out on the internet, Facebook, etc. The media part is reaching the press with press packets and information.
Sarah,
and
no.
radio and television.
No. Press.
No, it's not. It's not. I don't think it belongs with research. It isn't. It's with outreach. It's with public education.
Like, I propose that we go with the list that we've got. Just put this, if there's some people that think they have affinity for each other, just put them into small groups in the same room so we can see. Because my sense is if we get 5 or 6 people in each of these small groups, and there's a core of them where you don't have to have one person shuffling around with all of them. If you got 5 or 6 people, there's enough energy inside it to make it all happen.
Well, it looked to me as though there were 5 or 6 people in every committee that said they wanted to do it.
That's right. So let's check that out, see if it's true.
Yeah, I think, you know what, guys, it would be better if we stuck to our original plan, because it's getting kind of confusing.
Yes.
And it may be that we will end up combining things, but why don't we just follow what we've got here, so that people can meet that one, and just pick the one you most want to be in, and go into that one, and then later we'll see if we can combine them. And what you have to do when you get together in your committee, what you have to do, you have to make sure that everybody has signed up over here with their phone, address, and email. And we will need address, because at some point we're going to have to know where our people are in the neighborhoods and constituencies. And then make sure that if people have not signed that they sign in your committee. And then ask certain questions about how we can help move the petition, how we can help reach other people individually or organizations to get them into the coalition, how we can help set up speaking engagements, how we can produce materials. It's obvious to you kind of which one of those things go into which committee.
Yeah, I think Danny's suggestion is a good one too. They can at least, those 4 committees that are related, can meet in one room.
They could.
They could all start in this room, and then if the need be, they could go to another, and then they could switch around. We start out with one.
Listen, we have rented here today several rooms. So we can move people into we have 3 rooms besides this one? 3 altogether. All right, so then most people could go into different parts of this larger room in small groups. And then the other 2, I think we should just start right
Let's just do it.
this
And
room.
we'll be back here at 4:30.
No, we're going to lose people if we don't just get organized. The whole point of this meeting is to get organized. So, I think unless you guys can tell us exactly how big those rooms are, so we can decide who goes in there, we should just organize in this room, I think.
That's fine. Yeah.
What are the sizes of the other 2 rooms? What are the sizes?
It doesn't matter, we're going to split it into groups. Everybody like to be in that, on that committee, or is it going to go?
Where's legal?
I'm Dan.
Danny.
Dan, you give me research?
Yeah, press.
Press research.
I think legal should be the people dancing and
We're gonna do it this way.
Raise awareness on the UCSC and 3 campuses, and the way we're going to do that, we have a 5-point plan. First, we're going to identify professors and try to contact them, and then attend their lectures, and then do pre-presentation before their lecture begins. They typically allow this, and there we will pass around the petition as well as give them a brief summary about our task. Second, we want to set up booths on both campuses about once a week, where we can pass out literature and educate anyone walking by, and also get petitions signed. Third is we're going to flyer on both campuses with educational, it'll just like have information on the MBA and how you can help and sign the petition. Fourth thing, we're going to contact student organizations on campus, tell them about our cause, ask them to pass their petition around their organization. And the fifth thing is we're going to try to arrange speaking events on both campuses so that students can come together and have discussions about this.
You can also recruit them to come to class.
Oh, of course.
really? Yeah.
What course is it?
It's a Cowell 160, I think.
No, 103.
What is it?
Call 103 that starts on March 31, Tuesday, March 31.
103?
Cowell 103. Yeah, it's trajectory of justice.
And Danny, it's supposedly going to be streamed. It's going to be live streamed.
He's saying his class is going to be streamed. It starts on March 31st, and it's going to be a lot about the Constitution.
And about this.
Yeah.
So just try to recruit as many as kids to come. That way, the more students we get, the more long-time learners can match the same one.
The bigger the team gets for CPZ. I wanted to ask you if you could add to yours that when you go to the student groups, maybe we can give them a resolution that they could pass to join the coalition. That would be cool. And if you wouldn't mind kind of typing that up and emailing it into us so we can begin to keep a log for the. Okay. What's the next one?
This was just call one.
Oh, well, I don't know. Research.
So, yeah, we're the research committee. Basically, we are committed to providing information and facts to the other committees so that you can base your strategy as to how to go about getting CPZ past the city and the county level. We have a lot of specific plans that we're really excited about. We're going to pull documents from the county and the city. We're going to research political demographics here in Santa Cruz, in both the city and the county. We're going to pull election results. We're going to research the biographies of the 7 council members and the 5 members of the Board of Supervisors. We're going to look at election documents that show and describe who contributed to their campaigns. We are basically going to comprehensively and thoroughly analyze the political landscape in Santa Cruz. Yeah, should be fun. That's what we're doing.
Thank you very much. Okay. Organizing and outreach.
We had an energetic group. So one of the first things is there's a lot of interaction we need with the other committees here and the other groups, specifically with research and outreach, to have a vibrant database going back so that all the groups that we want to target, we get them into you, but somebody in research has an entire universe of them, and then that gets back out, maybe not just to the people in this group, but maybe even to a blast out to all those people that have signed the petition. Like, can you get this group? Can you sign this group? Can you set up a speaker? So we had a number of groups, Interlight, we have mountain bikers, we have Pacific surfer groups, there's a number of groups involved here. Parent-teacher organizations was suggested because the students, parents not knowing where their students are and they're vulnerable to something like this. Coffee shops, high school kids, also social media. I mean, a question about social media and tweeting. So how to organize that. There's a lot of interest in that. And a number of people don't have much time but are going to put in all the time they can. And a couple of us have significant time and want to use it. So good start.
Okay, art and music. Art and music?
So we just kind of combined art, music, and education, and we went around and introduced each other and got a landscape of what our skills are, and some ideas that popped up were maybe having a table at the farmer's market and having some music involved so we can draw people in. Also having booths at different festivals. One of those festivals is the New Living Expo, which I believe is going to be a part of. There's also the Rejuvenation Festival here in Santa Cruz, Earth Day, things like that, where we can incorporate music into our message. Also, we are going to send out the logo and the brand for CPZ just first within the education and the art and music group so that we can use those logos in order to put them on our own social media. And we're going to try and get together before the next large group gets together so that we can actually come up with some real good concrete ideas. Move forward.
Thank you. Admin and tech? Oh, okay. Legal?
We've got a lot of stuff, obviously, we have to look at to make certain that the questions, for example, of what response the federal government might have to the enactment of an ordinance like this that have to do with them asserting that they have the exclusive authority to pass resolutions on terrorism, etc., and that the states can't contradict them or the cities can't countervail them. You know, there's a lot of stuff that we have to work on in that regard. Plus, there's also that a lot of the people that are involved in elections, as you know, around the country are lawyers. And so what we were talking about is having an understanding of conducting this almost like a political campaign to organize a whole initiative with regard to the individual members of the city council and to the county board of commissioners, so that they're thinking in terms of their next election very concretely. You know, what impact is this going to have on their next election, not only positively but negatively if they don't support it, so that we can say, look, we're very familiar with how to organize, you know, someone else to take your place who happens to agree with this thing. So that's a kind of a lawyer-like thing to do.
Fundraising?
Well, we had a small committee, like 4 of us, but it's going to be powerful, and we know everybody is going to be on this committee, right? In the end, because we're all going to be fundraising. Okay, so some of the ideas that we had for fundraising initially were to have a large event before we go forward and approach City Council. So if we were going to do that in June, to have a large event in like May with somebody who is really, really popular who would help us out as a musician, like somebody famous. So that was one of the first ideas. And then we kind of piggybacked that to, we were just talking about ways we might fundraise, like barbecues and things. We started thinking about the weather and time of year, and we were like, well, maybe we could do something once a month, have it centered around something like, for example, Valentine's Day, or and then in March, like spring coming up, or St. Patty's Day. So, for example, for February, maybe doing some outreach on the idea of where we all really love our rights, and we really do love our Constitution, and finding a great musical pair like Tuck and Patty that's coming into town and asking them if they would pitch it from their, so piggyback with audiences. And Nora said that she knows somebody at the Rio, and so we're going to think about actually at the beginning just kind of doing it this way, piggybacking it with people that are already out there in the world, like musicians and venues like the Rio, and to get this thing maybe focusing on at least one fundraiser a month. And then another idea that we were talking about, but we're not thinking we would go forward with right this moment, would be the idea of a more systematic canvas or outreach effort, where the idea of the canvas is you try to literally canvas, like the white canvases people paint on. The idea that you're hitting every single door in the community, and therefore even finding doors, because in Santa Cruz here there's like ADUs and granny apartments and all these things, but that type of effort might be better utilized, like Danny's saying, once we see that we have a need, because it could be quite intensive in terms of getting enough people to do the canvas. But meanwhile, we came back to the idea that we could maybe set up house parties and things in neighborhoods, maybe not a canvas, but definitely working to kind of reach all the different neighborhoods and with things like that are a little less systematic, but still organized. And, do you see what I'm saying? It is systematic, but not a canvas. So those were some of the ideas that we came up with.
Our committee was a committee of 3. We are essentially going to be the hub of this task here, and that is taking care of the database. So when you have petitions signed, you're going to turn them into our department, and we will make sure that they get added to the list. And it's really important that we maintain a very clean list, so we will work diligently on that. We also have created already our email address, so if you'd like to write this down, we will be doing communications. So we'll communicate out to all the committees regarding meeting times and things like that. So the email address is going to be cpz@romeroinstitute.org.
CTC?
CPZ.
CPZ.
At romeroinstitute.org.
And that's Constitution Protection Zone, CPZ.
Okay, so if you have any questions from this meeting, or now that'll be our main way to communicate directly to the organization. And if you have any questions, I will also give you the our office number. You have any questions, need help with anything, administrative-wise, is 459-6135. And we are there Monday through Friday. Oh, my name is Christy, yes. Last thing, we have a meeting. Christy. Christina. I'll announce our next meeting. Now, that is going to be February 4th. We're going to get together as a big group again. That will be at the Romero Institute at 740 Front Street, Suite 265. And that'll be a potluck. We'd like to have it a potluck. That'll be from 5:30, we decided, until 7:30.
It's right up over Democratic headquarters.
It is right up over, right downtown, so it's convenient. If you haven't been there before, come see it.
What was the address?
740 Front Street.
In the Galleria.
In the Galleria.
Oh.
Suite 265. Suite 265.
We're upstairs.
You can't
We'll
find
have
it.
people
Just
down
gotta
at
send
the
it.
door.
Yeah, we may need to meet down in the lobby if we have a large group like this initially, and then break up into our committees. We may do that, but we'll figure that out at the time. But bring a dish if you'd like at dinner hour, so we'll all be hungry. But please bring something that you're going to take back with you, because we don't have facilities that carry over.
What day again?
It is January 4th. Wednesday.
Does that work for you guys?
Does it work?
We were trying to figure this out, but we didn't know whether Saturday was a good day, because a lot of people don't want to have a meeting on Saturday. So then we were trying to figure out, well, when is
Wednesday work for everybody?
Yeah, but it's good because it's a farmer's market, so a lot of us go down.
Saturday fun.
Oh, yeah, that'd be good.
Parking might be, oh, that's true. I mean, it's really easy to go to the farmer's market over to our place. Okay, so it works?
Yeah.
Okay, good. If it doesn't, we will figure something out, but that's, thank you.
Sure.
You all have a petition. Does everyone have their very own petition? No? Yeah. Raise your hand if you don't have your very own petition. Do you have one?
Here you go, bud.
There is an online.
Sarah? Yeah, I may be the only person who didn't know this, but it was clarified in the legal that only registered voters in Santa Cruz County can sign the petition.
No.
That's what I understand from Danny.
It's just, if in fact we're going to be able to, you have to usually are they showing the address and everything on the petition?
No.
Registered voters is only if you were trying to get a proposition on the ballot. You need to do registered voters. But for our purposes, just to sort of show widespread support, you can do.
So it wasn't just the registered voters, just residents of the area, right?
So who can sign the petition? Could you answer that, please?
I can't answer this question. Does anybody know the answer to this? I mean, if we're asking them to pass an ordinance, what is the resolution? What is the petition? If we're asking for the resolution and an ordinance by an elected body, does anybody know whether we have to be a registered voter?
No, it's not a registered voter, it's a resident.
Oh,
You have to be
well,
a
that's
resident of the city.
okay. Well, that's
You don't have to be
easier.
a registered voter, but you have to be a resident.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll just make a suggestion that when we're getting signatures, let's just get as many as possible, and at the back end, the admin team can split them out.
Yeah.
So if we ever need to find a list of our registered voters, we'll have it, but at the end of the day, let's just get it.
Right. And almost everyone that we're going to be talking to is going to be a resident of this area. So, okay, so the whole idea is, please, when we get together on February 4th, everybody bring back a fully signed petition. Right? And then, so another 400 people, boom, just like that, in the network. So then also, if you have assignments that you made with one another in your committees, please do your best to get them done. Because what happens is, when we all get together, when everybody's done what they said they were going to do, it goes forward like that. And then it just keeps going forward until we win. So the other thing is that if the people who gave the reports on the committees, if you could please type them up and send them to Christy at that Romero address that she gave, then she'll keep a record of what the committees are thinking about and working on, and we'll just keep adding to that as we go. I think we're. Does anybody have anything else they want to say before we close? Yes.
Those petition signatures again, they're from the county.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because we're going to the county board of supervisors and the city council, both of them. So the county is perfect. Yes.
Sorry, just another question. Which committee is responsible for like outreach materials? Flyers,
that would be public
messaging.
education. That would be public education. That's where you find the writers and the people who are going to help write this material. Yes. So, right, and so what you can do is if you have ideas that you want to go to that committee, or organizing thoughts about constituencies or whatever, now you know. We will put out for you the complete mailing list of everybody who's here, so you can contact one another. We'll put out who is the spokesperson for the community, for the committee at this point, so you can contact the committee. We'll get, Christy, where are you? She'll do it. She'll get it all together for you, and then you'll be able to communicate with one another. All right, so we'll do that. All right, thank you for coming, guys. All right. One last thing.
The position in our group is these are very easy to hand to people, and people take them when they're small. So grab one.
I think that's got the Chris Hedges event, stuff like that. A couple of games.
Oh, nice.